joining us today. Those who join, everybody will receive a small token of appreciation for being here with us. And as well as for every session, we will be doing a door prize. Your name will go into a drawing and you'll receive some beautiful posters. Chili said, Chili said that Dr. Frank has from her Red Mesa Cuisine. Beautiful. So every session, everybody's name will get put into a drawing. And then if you attend all 4 sessions, you will receive a grand prize. So that everything is hand signed by Dr. Frank, and beautiful cookbook with amazing recipes. So I hope that you will attend all 4 sessions. Thank you.
All right, and I'm just going to give a very brief tutorial on how we're going to use Zoom today in today's session so that you all can make the most of this experience and so everyone knows where everything is on Zoom. So first I'll kind of go through what it looks like on a computer screen, and then I'll show you where to find the same functions if you are on a phone. So the first thing to know about this Zoom webinar format is that your video and microphone are completely disabled, so no worries about accidentally coming off of mute. And if you want to adjust your audio settings, you can go to the bottom left corner of your computer screen to audio settings here and select speaker, your speaker or headset, or you can call in if that's easier for you. If you want to look at it on a computer and then call in separately, you can do that, or you can switch it to your computer audio. Either of those are available. And on your computer screen, you'll see you have a split screen with the presentation on one side and the speakers on the other hand. So you'll see that if you want to adjust the proportions on your screen, you can actually do that to make one side of the presentation larger and the other one smaller by dragging these 2 little dots that kind of split the screen in the middle there. And on your phone, here's what it will look like. You'll have the presentation big in the middle, and then the presenter will be on the top right. It won't be a split screen like it is on a computer, but there's a very similar setup to the audio options. Again, it'll be on the bottom left of your screen. And once you've joined the audio, again, if you want to change this, you can hit the More button with the 3 dots on the bottom right to disable the audio and rejoin it if you want to join via a different method. And please know that we are not going to be using the chat or the Q&A features today, but we will in later events. Thank you so much. I will turn it over now to Chef Lois Ellen Frank.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and looking forward to showing you my presentation. Today we're going to take a look at the history of Native American cuisine and some of the ancestral foods. And this is the key to health and wellness in our Native communities. And so it's very important that we understand what foods and a little bit about our past. So the first thing we have to do is take a look at the history. How did Native American cuisine evolve? What does that history look like? And we also want to keep in mind that each Native American community has their own unique history. That history is going to differ. If we live in the South, it's going to differ than if we live here along the pueblos of the Rio Grande, or if we're in the plains or on the East Coast or in the Northwest Coast. So some of the foods we can share and interchange, some of the foods are going to be different. So in order to understand the history of Native American cuisine, I call this going back to the past to move forward to the future. And so how did our history, how did our futures get passed on? Well, all Native Americans have oral tradition, and these oral traditions are how our ancestors passed on information. And food is more than just something to eat. Food is our medicine, food is our sovereign right, and food is the key to our health and wellness. And so even though our traditions were oral, it still is a form of science, and it still has a lot of validity in what we do and how we do it. So there are 4 historic periods in the timeline of Native American cuisine. The first is the pre-contact period. So that period is very important, and this is where a lot of our ancestral foods come from. The second is the first contact period. And I'm going to talk a little more in detail what that is, but that was first contact. And again, depending on where you are in the United States, who was the first people that we had contact with? So here in New Mexico, we had contact with the Spanish, and the Spanish brought their own foods and their own language. And so all of that influenced and influences what we eat. The third is the government issue period. And many of the tribes in this area, the Pueblos, have their ancestral homeland. My background is I am from the Kiowa Nation, and my tribe was actually relocated off of its ancestral homelands. So we lost our homelands altogether. We were forcibly moved to Oklahoma. And so the government issued foods to us, and those foods make up the government issue period. And the fourth is my most favorite. We're in the new Native American cuisine, and that is where we are now. So let's take a look at that. So pre-contact foods, ancestral cultivated wild plants and animals from about 10,000 years ago up until 1492. That was when first contact happened here in the United States, in the Americas. And then first contact from 1492 to about the mid 1800s. And a really good example of this would be sheep. With the Dene or the Navajo people. So sheep were introduced, but now those sheep are inseparable with the identity of Navajo people. Sheep is a part of their life, sheep is life, so very important. So some of the foods that got introduced got woven like a blanket into the fabric of who the people are. The government issue is the commodity foods that were introduced by the US government during the reservation period. And some of these foods are still being issued today. This happened, again, depending on where you are, middle to late 1800s during this relocation. Some tribes were able to keep their ancestral homelands, but those homelands shrunk. They're not as large as they used to be. Some tribes physically lifted or moved. Think of the Trail of Tears with the Cherokee, actually moved off their homelands onto new lands. And so this displacement, very difficult on Native people. And there's a lot of historical trauma surrounding that. And then the new Native American cuisine, foods sharing from the first 3 categories, fused, or again, woven is a good way to think about it, into a new cuisine. And that's where we all are now. So let's take a look at the first contact period. And I teach at the Institute of American Indian Arts. I do a indigenous food class. And so these are some of the foods that my students helped me put together. We had wild vegetables, wild carrots, wild celery, salad, wild spinach, purslane. Some of you may know or have harvested some of these. All types of wild fruits, including strawberries and blackberries, blueberries, choke cherries, wild grapes, wild currants, grains and nuts, wild rice, sunflower, pinon, very important here, pecans, mesquite, so lots of grains and nuts, and then wild animals. We did not domesticate animals for eating, we only hunted. So we ate very little amounts of meat because hunting is very unpredictable. And then medicinal plants, everything from arnica to creosote, desert sumac, globe mallow, rabbit bush, which is also the chamisa, wild teas, osha. So a lot of these plants we still see, and some people are still harvesting. So here's a really good map. We can look at different parts of the country. We could say, oh, look, there's maple syrup on the East Coast and around the Great Lake region, wild rice. You can look at the state of New Mexico, and there are 3 dominant foods. We know that bison came in and that many Pueblo people traded. I know certainly in Taos, they sing some Kiowa songs. So I know that even though I'm Plains tribe, we had relations and we traded with some of the Pueblos in northern New Mexico and traded bison for some of the wonderful corn that Pueblo ancestors grew. And then you can see chilies and also the pinon, the pine nut, very, very important here in New Mexico. So this map just shows some of the foods that are very important and where they were in the United States. So Magic 8, these are 8 foods that Native people gave to the world. Corn, beans, squash, chili, tomato, potato, vanilla, and cacao. And cacao is actually the bean that's roasted and ground, and that's where we get our delicious chocolate from today. So if you think about this, that means the Italians did not have the tomato. The Irish did not have the potato. Half the British national dish, right? They have fish and chips. Those chips are potatoes. That didn't exist. There were no chilies in any Asian cuisine anywhere in the world. And the French and the Swiss had no chocolate, which they're famous for today. So all of these foods given to the rest of the world by Native people, they are inherently Native American. So let's take a look. The 3 sisters, very important, corn, beans, and squash. That many of us grow our gardens and these vegetables. What's fascinating about these is not only the nutrients they provide, but the way they grow. Corn needs nitrogen from the soil, beans give nitrogen to the soil, and squash has big leaves shading the ground, keeping moisture in and preventing weed growth. So these 3, we could almost live just on these 3. These 3 very important in the Native American diet. And corn is the most sacred to many tribes, from as far north as it'll grow to as far south as it'll grow. And corn goes back about 9,500 years. So that's pretty far back, you guys. And teosinte was a grass, and that's how corn started. And now corn is one of the most important grains in the world. It's very, very important. And so corn has many layers of meaning. Many tribes look at corn as being maiden or mother or sister or healer. Corn is medicine, corn is sustenance, corn is food. For me personally, corn is the essence of life. We see her with song and ceremony as a storyteller, and many tribes think of her as a gift from the Creator. So corn, very important. Z is actually the genus that corn comes from. It's in the grass family. So Z maize or corn or Indian corn is this perennial, and it is a perennial, and it's dependent on man. And so we have a relationship. It's dependent on humans to grow. It is indigenous to the Americas, and it is considered to be a gift by many tribes throughout the Americas. And we can see corn in a variety of ceremonies. Here, this is Calandra, who now lives in Albuquerque, but she's from the Navajo Nation, and she will use corn as part of her Kinalda, and the Kinalda is the coming of age ceremony. So you can see that corn is being used for the passage from girl to woman. This is Tiffany, and Tiffany is using corn pollen. She's also from the Dene Nation or Navajo Nation, and she's going to make an offering to the ground before they plant, and her family's going to grow corn and squash, some tomatoes and sunflowers, and so she uses this as part of it. Beans, amazing. They are an excellent source of fiber. They're high in protein, low in fat. They have vitamin B6, high in potassium, lots of minerals. Really important about beans, slow release, which means they are a perfect food for diabetics. It reduces blood sugar, improves cholesterol level, and maintains a healthy gut. So we want to make sure we have lots of beans in our diet, because not only are they native, but they're very, very healthy. And my most favorite bean, this is grown out in Hopi. We've been growing it here in northern New Mexico. This little bean is from the Tohono O'odham and the Akmil O'odham. So in the south of Arizona, bordering into Mexico and parts of New Mexico. And it's 23 to 30% higher in protein than any other bean. So it's truly an energy food. And these are easy. They do grow quite well here in northern New Mexico. Again, perfect food to keep our blood sugar balanced. So we want to incorporate as many beans into our diet as possible. Squash is actually considered a superfood. It's got fiber and antioxidants, manganese, which boosts bone strength and helps the body's ability to process fats and carbohydrates. It's high in vitamin A, vitamin C, B6, and lots of minerals. And of the squash family, butternut is the healthiest squash. So let's think of ways to incorporate butternut squash into our diet. Here you can see a squash poster. Squash, there are many, many, many different kinds, and there's summer squash and winter squash. So how do we divide that up? Well, our ancestors ate the outside, the summer squash, throughout the summer months. So any squash where you eat the outside, for instance, zucchini or yellow squash or Mexican squash, is considered a summer squash. And all the squashes that have a hard shell are considered winter squash. Pumpkin, Mexican squash, you can see acorn squash, butternut squash. So all of those are winter squashes. And that's a really good way. And now you see in the supermarket tons of winter squash because we're moving into the winter months. So you'll see squash at different times of the year. Chilies, one of my most favorite, and I know a favorite amongst many of the Pueblos, have lots of medicinal qualities. One green chili has the equivalent in vitamin C of 6 oranges. So chilies are both antifungal, antibacterial, and they can be used topically, and they release endorphins in the body. And I'm going to show you a slide on that. So here in New Mexico, what is our state question? Red or green? And what do they mean when they're asking us our state question? Do you want red or green chilies? So chilies really, really important. They add flavor, they add vitamins, and they add nutrients. So again, really important. And look at the beauty. You can go from a very hot chili to a mild chili to a jalapeno chili. And so chilies not only have nutrients and flavor, but they are certainly, I think, one of the most beautiful plants that we use in our ancestral native diet. And as the body defends itself, so when we eat chili, the response is, ooh, a little bit spicy, right? Different people are going to be able to handle different heat, different times, but the body actually releases an endorphin. And this endorphin is sort of a natural painkiller. It's a feel good. And so it leaves you with a little bit of a high, boosting a response. And the only other thing that does this is chocolate and exercise. So chili's right up there with some of the best foods that we need to eat and incorporate into our diets. Tomatoes, again, one of my favorite vegetables. These are tomatoes from the Santa Fe Farmers Market. Vitamin A and C, lots of antioxidant. Lycopene is one of the most important in the tomato, and they are a great source of potassium, folate, and vitamin K. So tomatoes we can also incorporate into lots of foods and lots of things that we can eat. They can well, they freeze well. And so when tomatoes are at their peak, I always can. This year I canned over 350 pounds of tomatoes, and I have about 180 jars that will last me through the winter and that I can use as a chef. So that's another thing. Potatoes, the first potato cultivated somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 years ago. They originated with the Inca and the Inca people in the highlands of Bolivia and Peru. And so potatoes, another really important food into our diet. Here you can see their fuel. So they have carbohydrates and protein and fiber, and that gives us energy. They have vitamin C, right? So one potato, you want to leave the skin on. We want to leave those skins on. Low in calorie, but lots of, they have no fat, no sodium, no cholesterol, and they're really, really important. And so we can use these a lot in our soups, our stews, and a lot of different ways. And the sweet potato, research has been done, and the sweet potato, people are living well past 100 years old in certain parts of the world. And why? Because they're eating the sweet potato. So sweet potato, oh, digestion, it's great for immune system, for asthma, bronchitis, arthritis pain, so stomach ulcers. So sweet potato, we want to also figure out ways, how do we incorporate that? And when I say sweet potato, I don't mean putting tons of marshmallows on top. I mean eating it in its simple form for health and wellness. So this is a very important food. Vanilla, and here we see harvesting. I think the most amazing thing for me with vanilla, it's highly valued for its flavor. And some of you may have noticed it's getting more expensive. That's because it's hard to grow, but look at how beautiful. How did the ancestors know how to harvest this orchid and that it would become something that would be paired so closely with its sister, cacao? So cacao, here we see the fruit. Fresh cacao pods are dried and roasted. You can see the beans. Once they're roasted and toasted, they can be used into cocoa powder or chocolate. The darker the chocolate, the healthier it is, and the more antioxidants. So milk chocolate, you want to stay away from. We don't want those milk solids. We want to go darker and darker, darker. And the darker chocolate, you're going to instantly, again, feel that endorphin. That's why chocolate feels so good when you eat it. The darker the chocolate, the healthier it is. Rich in fiber, iron, magnesium, copper, manganese, and other minerals. So all of those magic 8, very important, but we don't want to just stop there. We want to also keep in mind wild foods, okay? This is really, really important in the Native American diet. So let's take a look at some wild foods that exist here in New Mexico. The pecan. You see the pecan grown to the south. It's not really a nut. It's actually a fruit that's surrounded with a pit and a husk. And actually the word pecan is Algonquin, so coming from tribes on the east and in the deep south. And it actually means a nut that the crows could break. And it was the crows that helped it migrate. This is the #1 nut crop here in the state of New Mexico in the millions and millions of dollars. So 1/2 cup has 691 calories, lots of minerals and fibers and protein. And so really, really important. And the second most important nut you can see here in, it originated and then it migrated westward into what is now New Mexico. So this beautiful pecan, a very important nut. And the pine nut or the pinon also is a nut or a seed from edible pine cones. This very important. There are many stories in many different pueblos about this. So when there was no wild game here, this nut provided 1/2 cup has 673 calories, lots of good fats. So when there was no wild game, this sustained some of the ancestors in this region. It's a very, very important wild food. Chokecherry, one of my favorites. And actually, I did get some chokecherry bushes from the nursery at Santa Ana Pueblo, and I planted it in my front yard. So where the canales drip water on the north side of my house. And this year, I harvested 33 pounds of chokecherries just from my front yard. So this particular bush will grow very well. It does like a little colder, so you always want to try and do the north side. But again, excellent source of fiber, contains vitamin K and lots of minerals. So chokecherry is very important to the Kiowa people, and I always use these little chokecherries and boil them down into a sauce, a juice, or a syrup, and then I freeze it so I can use it throughout the year. So chokecherries also very important, and they were traditionally and still are traditionally used for dyes. So we can see some of the beautiful weavings and the color would come from chokecherry. Cota, which is the Spanish word for Indian tea or Pueblo tea or Navajo tea, also very healthy, lots of medicinal qualities, a good blood purifier, and a kidney stimulant, but you want to make sure that you have that tea without sugar. And my most favorite of all, purslane. It's a weed. It grows everywhere. If any of you plant a garden, you're going to see this little plant. It's a vital ingredient in many of the prehistoric Pueblo diets. It's got lots of minerals, but the most fascinating thing is it's higher in omega-3s than salmon. So this little plant has tons of omega-3s, lots of vitamins. It can be eaten fresh and harvested during the summer months, or it can be made into a soup or a broth or dried for winter use. So very, very important. So don't forget the wild plants with those other foods from the pre-contact period. Then history moves forward and we have first contact. So what did the Spanish bring to this area? Well, they brought sheep, pork, beef, chicken, eggs, and dairy, including cheese, milk, yogurt, and ice cream, as well as our northern New Mexico apples, peaches, apricots, cherries, watermelons, which I know everybody considers a traditional native food, cabbage, wheat, wine grapes, and others. So some of these foods we want to keep in our diet and some we don't. And remember, native people never ate dairy. Why? Because we only hunted wild game. And you can't really milk a wild bison or a wild elk or a wild deer. I suppose maybe the ancestors could have tried, but one try and they would quickly learn that we're not going to have any dairy. So a lot of us are lactose intolerant. So I don't use a lot of dairy. I don't do well with dairy. So I'm sticking to those plant or nut-based. I eat my cereal now with almond milk or oat milk. So again, these were the foods that were introduced, but again, we see them woven into, here you see some cherries and figs and apples, wheat, rice, things that were introduced with things that were here. So that pre-contact, first contact period, two distinct periods in our native foods history. And then the government issue. So this was forced relocation. A lot of native communities lost their agricultural and hunting base from this relocation. And if your heritage was that you did not lose your land, that land still shrunk. Less land means less access. So today we see peanut butter and dried fruits and canned soups and pasta, white rice and others. But initially what was introduced was flour, lard, coffee, sugar, and the infamous canned meat, which everybody knows, called Spam. And so what came out of that was fry bread. So fry bread is born from this period, and the Indian taco. And out of 574 federally recognized tribes, there are other that are just states. So there's more tribes in this, but these are the federally recognized tribes as of today, because I double checked that yesterday. Almost every tribe knows how to make fry bread. So those foods that we were issued, our ancestors made recipes to sustain them. And if you want to eat fry bread occasionally or once or twice a year, then that's something to do, but we don't want to eat this food every day. And so here we see that infamous Indian taco. And so on that fry bread, native people piled things as well. There's that orange commodity cheese that some of you may know. And so what we're going to do is figure out ways to make this dish healthier and do a healthy Indian taco. And that's going to be one of our classes that you're going to learn moving forward. That's going to be session number 3. So it's only in recent history, about the last 150 years, during this forced introduction and distribution, that our health and wellness has been drastically altered, drastically changed. Why? Well, we want to take a look seriously at some of the foods and why this has happened. So I'm going to introduce a term. Some of you may or may not be familiar with this. It's called food sovereignty. And this is the idea that we really have the right as Native people, as Indigenous people, to produce and distribute and consume our own food. And that food is our Indigenous Native food. And so the short definition would be we have the right, it's not a privilege, it's a right to have healthy, culturally appropriate food. So it's not just about enough calories or food security, it's about using these ancestral foods, reclaiming and revitalizing them for health and wellness. So what we also want to acknowledge is that there's an important relationship between Native people and the land's creatures and the land's plants. We've always had ceremonies. So the land and the people are linked, right? You can't have a healthy land without a healthy people, and you can't have a healthy people without healthy land. So this is the American bison, which almost became extinct. And now we can say that this food is being reintroduced onto some of the pueblos, and that ceremonies have always honored many of these sacred foods. We give gratitude, we have corn dances, we have different kinds of dances. And so this is a form of food sovereignty, and it's also a healthy connection to culture. And we're going to look at that healthy connection to culture in session number 2. So food sovereignty, again, just to recap, is a form of food justice. It's a form of food security. Here we see Chef Walter Whitewater. This is my garden. The choke cherries I harvested from my yard and the corn that I grow. And so it's also environmental justice. And all of this is dependent on TEK. And TEK is the wisdom of the ancestors, the knowledge of the ancestors. So all of our communities need to be able to produce and grow and harvest their own food, as well as buy from or trade, right? We've always traded from other native vendors and growers. So TEK stands for traditional ecological knowledge, and I make sure my students that I know what this means. Very important. So what we learn as a child, we carry through and pass on so that we can pass on that information through generation after generation. How is it passed on? Songs, stories, beliefs, and this is a part of our spiritual and mental wellness. So this is very important. We want to take that ancestral knowledge and pass it on. And this is a really good model that I just wanted to show you. So what happened in the past? Well, our ancestors looked around, factual observations, what was around them, and then they managed those systems. Native people never cut down all the trees or harvested all the plants or hunted all the game. We never did that, right? Took all the fish. You take what you need, managing, and then they took a look at past and current. As the climate changes or weather changes or drought cycles, we have to be able to know what's going to happen. How do we plant? What are some of the ways? And then ethics and values, right? So what are the ethics and values? In my tradition, we make an offering before we plant or before we harvest. And then number 5, that's who we are. Culture and identity just means this is who we are. So cosmology is sort of a fancy word for how do we look at the world. And so this is really important because our ancestors knew everything to be healthy and well. And that's the information we need to learn or relearn so that we can pass it on. So what do we need to do this? Well, we need land, right? Unpolluted. We need to be able to grow food. We need knowledge. We need the ability to access foods from our ancestral homeland. We need to be able to go onto land and harvest the pinon. And we need education, all ages, starting from very, very young to old on how to do this. So this is called the Native American food movement. Everybody can participate. All of our community members need to get involved, right? We can start gardens and we can take land and start to grow herbs and plants and learn how to cook and have classes, traditional farming, maybe get a group together and go wild food gathering. So all of these are things that we can do. Nutrition and cooking classes. This event alone is great because all of you are going to learn, and then you're going to tell your healthcare providers and what do you want to learn, what do you need more of, and then they can help provide that so we can all be healthy. Because what's the ultimate goal? Food is our medicine, and we want to be healthy individuals so we don't get sick. We want to take a proactive plan to doing this. And then what does that do? It revitalizes everything. Cultural, spiritual, physical connection between the environment and our community for health and wellness. So here's a picture of a farm up in Abiquiu, and they're growing ancestral foods next to some modern foods. So we can have both. This is my student from my IAIA Indigenous Food class. Her name is Kelly Tungovia. And for her, she had a ceremony. Again, this is a transition, so from girl to woman, where she learned how to grind corn. And I have grinding stones that have been passed on from generation to generation in my family, and I know how to grind, right? I'm a chef and I do large events, so a lot of times I'll go to Santa Ana Pueblo and have them grind corn for me and buy their corn, but we all should know how to do it ourselves. So this is very important, and probably one of the most important foods, at least for Kelly Tungovia, and on some of the Pueblos, is what's called piqui or paper bread. And if you look back, this cornbread recipe goes back thousands of years. Cornmeal, culinary ash, and water. 3 ingredients. It's made on a stone. You can see the ladies making it here. And then we can eat it. I like to eat it with hummus. That's one of my favorite things. So this is that bean that I talked about earlier, the tepary bean with some of the piqui, and one of my favorite things. So again, using these ancestral foods for health and wellness. And then we can trade. Don't forget, we traded. I know the Kiowas traded with the Pueblo people, and Pueblo people traded with other Pueblos. And so what we want to do is we want to keep some of those trading. So if I grow choke cherries and I have 33 pounds, I could trade someone else maybe for some corn, or if you've got an apricot or an apple tree. And so we want to keep alive. Otherwise, we can buy this corn that I'm using here is from Tamaya, so Santa Ana Pueblo, and I use it now in my blue cornbread. I also buy white corn from them and make white cornbread. So this new native food, all right, this is the 4th period, shares components from the first 3. When we think we combine these into a new food, but the new food is old, right? We're just doing new foods from our ancestral foods. Again, think of that metaphor. Food is our medicine. We want to use these foods for well-being. And here are some pictures of some contemporary foods based on old ancestral foods, right? So you can see there's a squash fry, calabacitas, you might know it as, corn soup. We make it with just water, onion, garlic, and corn. There's some beans with some wild rice, and you can actually harvest the baby tumbleweed greens. They've got lots of nutrients, some chilies with beans, little tamales. That's a blue corn tamale with red chili. And then there's a dumpling, which we shaped into arrowheads with a guajillo chili sauce. So different meats and different foods. Here's the sunflower cakes. So just sunflower, water, and this is with an herb jelly. This is a sunflower cake, very easy to make. Again, foods that represent who we are. Here we see a delicious guacamole. These are contemporary versions of ancestral food. And there again is that amazing calabacitas. And I can bet, and I always say that everybody's grandma's grandma makes calabacitas the right way. I just make it my way. So there's no right way or wrong way to make calabacitas. Flour, tort, here's squash blossoms. And what we want to keep in mind, so here's Walter, and Walter's one of the chefs I work with, is that we want to pass down information to the younger generation, Bertina. And so we want to make sure that chefs have information to be able to pass on the culinary traditions. So here we worked with a community and they had forgotten or that information was lost. How do you clean and grill cactus? And so what we did was we did a class and we showed how do you do it. And then look at this beautiful salad with cactus. You can use grilled cactus, orange segments, pumpkin seeds, and roasted red bell peppers. So again, very healthy, using some of that ancestral knowledge. And I don't know how many of you know this, but it takes one generation, one, for our songs, our stories, our recipes, our language to disappear. So we make this corn soup, and this is made with a paint, and the paint is just made from beans with roasted red bell pepper. And we use the spiral design because the spiral design represents that knowledge, starting at the beginning of time and spiraling outward. And then we use 4 dots. 4 dots represent 4 generations. Remember, in a lot of native cultures, everything, especially in mine, we use a medicine wheel. 4 is very important. 4 generations. So what are those generations? You start as a child, you become an adolescent, then you become middle-aged, and then you become an elder. So that spiral cannot continue if all of those 4 generations don't know how to pass on this knowledge, right? So it's very important that we learn, and we learn as much as we can, so when we become elders, we can pass it on. And this is true of everything in all of our cultures. Otherwise, this information is forgotten and can't be passed on. So again, very important in this. So how do we do this? What's a good way to do this? Well, we want to form partnerships. So what's an Indigenous partnership? Well, it's short and long term, because we don't want to work with anyone that just comes into our community and then leaves. We want to form relationships that last, right? And we want to work with groups, health professionals, our diabetes educators, our counselors, families, friends, nonprofits, where the Indigenous agenda takes priority. So we want to make sure that these institutions work with us and can help us with this information. Maybe we can get a grant to plant a garden, or maybe we can do a cooking class, or learn how to harvest the foods from the garden, or do a wild food workshop, or how to make the tea, or how to make mush. So we want to make sure that we have information and partnerships where we can pass this information out. So cooking, chefs, this is a great way to do this. This is using, Walter loves to use dots. You can see him with the potatoes there, dots, and some of the other chefs. There are chefs all over the United States now that want to pass on this information. This is a great shot. This is Bertina corn 3 ways. So we have blue corn mush, we have a corn salad, and a corn soup, right? And if that were on the menu somewhere, I know I would order it. So we want to see these foods in some of our facilities and large hotels and gaming and health centers, and that's what we have to do. Here is Letitia, and she's making just corn mush with sumac. And I don't know how many of you know how to harvest sumac. It grows all over. It's a little red, sort of fuzzy berry. We call it a lemon pepper berry. And so she's adding sumac to the corn mush, and that is very important. Here's corn mush 3 ways. So we have blue corn, we have a white corn that's toasted, and whenever you toast the corn, it gets a little darker, and then the corn with the sumac. And actually, this chef, Freddie, is now the head chef at the National Museum of the American Indian. So he started out and actually has gone really far in his career. So all professionals, all cooks, all colors need to come together. We need to educate on these foods so that people understand why these foods are important to us. Here you can see Walter and another chef, Tracy. They're going to grill some peaches. Oh, one of my favorite things, just with a little maple syrup or agave on it. Yum. And so what happens? Why does all this matter? I always ask my students, so what? Well, we want new outcomes. We want to make change in our Native communities. Why? Why? Because we want to be healthy. So what happens? When we do these things and incorporate this history and learn our history, we activate TEK. And all of you remember TEK is that knowledge from the ancestors. We start to embed indigenous links, right? We recover social values, and we want to transition from only Western to Western and Native. And I always believe the two work together. We need our health professionals. We need to work with doctors, especially surrounding health and wellness, but we also want to incorporate some of our indigenous practices. So we want to work together, right? We want to teach methods and strategies for health and wellness. We want to strengthen partnerships, right? Different partnerships on a local, tribal, and state or federal level. And we want to identify resources that assure us to have accessibility, right? We want access to safe, fresh, and healthy foods. And this is important. And I think all of us want to be healthy. We want our children and their children to be healthy. So that's why this is so important. And so it doesn't matter if you grow up on the reservation or in an urban area. This is a picture of Tidra and Calandra. And Tidra and Calandra are, one grew up off reservation, one grew up on reservation, but they still want to be able to learn their traditional foods to be able to pass those on. And I love this. I'm going to end with this. So Tidra, who went to Institute of American Indian Arts, she was one of my students, and we've been working together ever since. This is what she says. When I'm around Native foods, it reminds me of Grandma's house, because that's what I got to eat when I would go back home. Now I'm trying to learn the importance of making the same food for myself and keeping these Native foods alive in my own life. And so she's starting to realize that you have to put some effort and energy into learning these so that you can keep them alive and pass them on. So that is my information, and you're welcome to take a screenshot of that. This is my life's work. I've dedicated my life to promoting healthy plants and healthy foods and learning about our ancestral food traditions. And I just am so honored that you've let me talk to all of you today and tonight, this evening. And so I'm going to turn it back over, but I hope you'll stay tuned and watch some of the other sessions, because we're going to have lots of fun and we're going to do some great cooking as we move forward with these other sessions. All right.
Excellent. So very good. Thank you, Dr. Frank. That was wonderful. It was everything we had hoped for. We look forward to the next two sessions with you, and then with Dr. Trapp as well. We certainly like watching you cook. So we're definitely looking forward to seeing that fry bread and Indian taco get made. And thanks everybody for joining us for our first presentation. And thanks for Physicians Committee for helping us put this together. And we will see everybody next week. Y'all have a blessed evening, and we'll talk to you later.